Well, we're broadcasting from beautiful Vancouver, BC, Canada, and I have Michael Harcourt with me today. And Michael was the ex-premier of the province. I consider Michael a very good friend of mine. We might not share the same political views, but we are dear friends and we talk often. So, Michael, welcome to the show. And now, before I get Michael to talk, because once Michael starts talking, he's a politician, I have a chance to go out and wash the car. So, anyhow, a little introduction, a little bit about Michael. I'm sure a lot of people would remember Michael. He was the mayor of Vancouver during Expo, which was 1986 to 1981. And Michael was also the premier of our province from 1991 to 1996. So, Michael, fill us in with more details about Michael Harcourt.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll go right back to the beginning. I like a lot of people in British Columbia, came from somewhere else, being Alberta and being born in Edmonton in 1943. And my dad was born in Calgary, my mother in Lethbridge. So typical British Columbians, Gerry. And we moved back to Vancouver because my dad grew up after he was born in Calgary, grew up in Burnaby and graduated Burnaby South High School, class of 1929, when it was on this Gilly Avenue, the South Slopes, when it was pretty low density dairy farms and all that sort of stuff. And I grew up in basically in Vancouver, went to many schools throughout the city, and graduated Sir Winston Churchill High School in South Vancouver, and out to UBC then for took a BA in political science and English, and after that into law school, and graduated from UBC Law in 1968. Left the law school to set up a storefront law office to give free legal advice to poor people who didn't have access to lawyers and legal advice. And so we set up a whole series, we being a number of volunteer lawyers and some of the profs at UBC and law students in various neighborhood centers to advise people that were tenants and debtors, and dealing with bureaucracies like welfare and unemployment insurance, and helped establish the Legal Aid Society of British Columbia so that people who are being charged with a criminal offense could have access to a defense lawyer, and also a community law office to gather information on areas that are just crying out for reform. For example, we had a really dumb law in those days where a bank or a credit union or a creditor could garnish a debtor's wages. And that would then usually mean the boss would fire them and everybody lost. The creditor lost a source of revenue for the debtor to pay from. The debtor lost his job, and the employer of the debtor lost usually a good employee. We just had tough financial times. Anyway, so I did that, and did it for about 3 years and got it all set up. First one in Canada, and after that went into a private practice as a criminal defense lawyer, which I did for 15 years, but got bit by the political bug. In 1972, I ran for city council after my dealings in the previous years with City Hall, who wanted to build a freeway, the members of council, with the federal provincial governments along the waterfront in Vancouver, which would have been elevated along Stanley Park in the North Shore, right across the waterfront downtown Vancouver, blocking the view and access to that magnificent waterfront, and then wipe out Gastown and Chinatown, the two heritage areas in the city. And I was asked by some of the local members of the Chinese community and as a staff person at City Hall, if I'd be the lawyer for the people in Chinatown and Strathcona and the East Side neighborhoods that was going to go through this 8-lane freeway. And I said, sure. And we took on the City Hall and the federal government, the provincial government, the downtown business community, the construction industry, the oil and gas industry, the auto industry. It was quite a fight, but we won. We got the federal government to stop urban renewal, tearing down old neighborhoods, building freeways, and to start to work with citizens, talk to them, engage citizens in what kind of a city we wanted, which whet my appetite for city politics, because I really was very unhappy with the nonpartisan association, the council that dominated politics at the time. And in 1972, in the election in November, I was asked by TEAM, which the Electors Action Movement, which was a broad-based municipal political party, people who were New Democrats like me, or liberals, or conservative entrepreneurial types like you, Gerry. And we won. We won 9 seats on council out of 11, including the mayor's chair. And to my surprise and my then brand new wife Becky's horror, I won and started a 24-year career in politics on the council in the 80s, and then as mayor 3 terms from 1980 to 86. In 1986, after a hugely successful expo, to provincial politics, where I became leader of the opposition in 1987, and in 1981, Premier of British Columbia to 1996. And then after 9 election wins in a row and 24 years in politics, I decided a good time to get out before the posse caught up with me. So I retired in 1996 and have been doing a variety of things we can talk about later. But that's a quick summary of my life and times. And Becky and I, of course, have a terrific son, Justin, who's a planner, business guy, who is a senior VP at Colliers and does development work and other assignments. And he married Natalie, his lovely wife, and they have a twin, soon 10-year-olds, boy, girl, London and Grace. So there you go. That's a quick run through quite a few years.
Well, Mike, I have to bring up the point that when you took on this case for these merchants of Gastown and Chinatown, that was on a pro bono situation.
Yeah. Well, it was pro bono, but it was part of, as I saw it, my duties as a community lawyer. I received a modest salary, and part of it was giving legal advice through the clinics, pushing for law reform, and I gave you an example of that, plus landlord and tenant and quite a few other areas, but also representing citizens in low-income communities who are being pushed around by bullying city halls or other people who wanted to ruin their communities, basically.
Now, is this service still available today? Yes, it was available when you graduated from university, UBC. Fast forward it to 2023. Is there still a channel out there for legal aid for these Gastown merchants and Chinatown merchants?
Oh, it's expanded dramatically since then, and I participated in helping some of that expansion to expand legal aid to deal with matrimonial issues and immigration and dealing with people with mental illness and addictions. So it's a very extensive program, and many of the students at the law school participate, are supervised by very experienced and skilled members of the law society, lawyers, and serving thousands of people, not just now in Vancouver, but all over British Columbia, and actually throughout the country.
Interesting. Now, Mike, before we jump into the landscape of what the Canadian politics look like and the provincial politics look like, you had a situation where it led you to writing a book called Plan B. And do you want to talk more about that experience? What happened one day filling up the hot tub with a couple of buckets of hot water?
Right. Over at our terrific summer place on North Pender Island, right on Navy Channel, looking across to Main Island. And we had, Becky and I built a really neat place back in the 70s and used it a lot. We're there the end of November 30th, in 2002 to close up the place for the winter, and then go to your and Melissa and Becky and mine's favorite island, Maui, in Hawaii. But before we were going to leave, after a cup of tea for a snack, and Becky heading out to the garden to finish out there, my job was to take a couple of buckets of hot water and put it in the hot tub so we could have our last a hot tub before getting to the ferry and back to Vancouver and on to Maui. And as I went out onto the platform at the front of our house, where the hot tubs was at the end of this platform, I slipped on the wet, because it was raining. I slipped on the wet wooden plank for this platform we have that it's only a foot or so off the ground, and sort of went backwards with these two buckets of water and then forward, and the mass of the water in the buckets kind of catapulted me, and I just happened to be turned the wrong direction, which was right off the ground, 10 feet of ground between the platform and a 20-foot cliff, and hydroplaned over the wet ground cover and over the cliff and to the rocks below. And a total freak accident, but there I was, face down in a puddle of seawater, couldn't move, and the tide was coming in, so it was a pretty tricky situation. And I got, I don't know if you call it lucky or after a terrible accident like that, but Becky wondered where I was and went looking for me and saw the buckets and my slippers, and then looked over the cliff and saw that I was lying face down, and reacted very quickly to go down to the beach and turn me over, prop me up, call 911. And again, fate was on my side, because when she connected with the fire hall and ambulance, voluntary fire department and ambulance, on North Pender Island, they were all of them, the firefighters and the ambulance crews, were having a joint training session. So they're all right there and could respond very quickly, 10, 12 minutes away from our place, to come and gently turn me over and put my neck, which was very badly damaged, in a sling on a platform. And then from there, because they couldn't get me up the hill behind our house on the road we had then, very steep and difficult, they called for the Coast Guard, and to again, just blind luck, there was an auxiliary Coast Guard boat a mile away that could roar over to our beach area there, put the platform on the Zodiac, and take me to a wharf 3 miles away, and then have the ambulance meet me there and take me to the island medical clinic, where again, all these circumstances are the reason I'm still here. The very experienced island doctor who had been practicing for decades was on duty that day, Don Williams, and he was able to phone around after determining my injuries to see whether I would be going to Victoria to be operated on, or to Vancouver General Hospital. And again, it just so happened that one of the 3 best spinal cord surgeons in the world, Marcel Dvorak, happened to be on duty then, and had an opening and could take me. And so I was helicoptered from the island to the one of the roofs of VGH, and then into being examined and operated on, and then rehab over the next few months at GF Strong, and very fortunate to get 80% of my functions back, but still a partial quadriplegic with 20% still frozen, and from the injury.
So you were that was actually 20 years. I mean, this is the 20th year anniversary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It could have been 0 anniversary, but I got very lucky, and so I wrote a book about it, the experience, and called it Plan B, and it's what you have in spades, which is a very positive attitude. It's not what you can't do; it's what I can do, and then setting goals and reaching your goal successfully. And I noticed when I was at GF Strong, which is a terrific rehab hospital at facility, I noticed that there were a lot of young guys in there, and they had suffered the usual terrible motor vehicle accident or motorcycle accident, or dove off a cliff into a lake or river and broke their neck on a stone, or at the bottom they didn't see, skiing accident, whatever. I noticed that the ones that languished were the ones with what I call a plan A attitude, which is, poor me, why did this happen to me? I'm raging at their fate. And they usually didn't rehab very well because they were just so full of self-pity and consumed by what they were not able to do or be now. But there was some in there who realized that, I'd been badly injured. I got to get on with my life. Plan A is over. I got to get on with Plan B, and then start to create a new life for themselves, realizing there's certain things they couldn't do, and some of them were very badly injured, were quadriplegics, and far worse shape than I was. I was probably fortunate enough to be in the top 5% of rehabilitatable people with spinal cord injuries using an ASEAN, ASEAN rating system. I was right at the top of that in terms of rehab capabilities. And so I set some goals and met with my rehab team, the rehab doctor, and the nurses and physios and social workers, psychologists, and they gave me the tough love news that I was probably going to be in rehab at VF Strong for 6 months, and I was going to come out in a wheelchair. And I said, no, here's the script. I'm walking out of here in 3 months because I got a golf tournament to play in 6 months. So let's work our way back, from 3 months to now. What do we have to do to get me ready to be able to do that? And so we set up a very ambitious rehabilitation program. And I, just to make sure everybody stuck to it, I did a press conference from my hospital bed and told the media that that's what I was going to do. I was going to be rehabbing with the great team that I had, and I was going to walk out at the end of February, and did, with the help of our son Justin, and did play in that golf tournament. And BCTV took a picture of me, luckily not whiffing on the first tee in Kamloops, the Dunes golf course, whacked it not as far as I used to be able to whack it, but right down the middle. And the book, I've been delighted and honored that a number of people tell me about it, that they bought it, they read it, they gave it to their son or their, the husband who had a stroke, or a relative who had a serious illness or accident or injury, and it helped people think about, are you going to do Plan A or Plan B?
Well, I did read the book, and I think, Mike, our first encounter, when we were in Maui, Mike and Becky would be there, and Mike, after his accident, I don't know how soon after the accident, maybe you can fill in the blanks, but I remember seeing you on the Wailea boardwalk, and I was always starstruck. I went, oh, there's Mr. Harcourt, or there's Premier Harcourt. And then fast forward a couple of years later, you and I became very good friends, and we'd spent a lot of time since those times. But how soon were you doing the boardwalk after your accident?
The next year we went back.
Really good for you.
And stayed in the Wailea area, and enjoyed our daily morning walk at 7 in the morning, where Becky would, along with her sister, Monica, would go for a long jog, walk, and I'd crank along on my walking poles as far as I could get, and then turn around and go back. So it almost, within the year of us having to cancel the trip the year before.
Well, the book is called Plan B, and it is a great book. I recommend everybody to pick up a copy. I'm sure it puts a couple dollars into Michael's pocket, but it is a great story. We've always teased Mike that he needs to rewrite the book and thank Gerry Scott for being there along the way and providing guidance and strength. But that's a little humor between us. So let's move on to the political landscape in Canada, and what do you see? And then we'll go into the provincials, and then we'll go into the history of British Columbia, where you and I can have a lot of fun talking about. So what is your views of Canadian politics right now federally?
I think our federal political scene is very uncertain, very dynamic. My sense is that the present Prime Minister Trudeau is beset by a series of challenges and problems and issues that has affected his popularity, and he's struggling anyways with a minority government, and has an agreement with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP of how they can maintain a majority vote in the parliament, and it's based on the NDP request that pharmacare and dentacare be introduced, and affordable housing be built, and it's a very tricky situation for him now, and made even more challenging by the fact that he's getting beat up on all sides. Got the Chinese leaders after him, and the Indian leaders after him, and has just gone through a separation from his wife, and he's down in the polls, and so his situation right now looks pretty grim. Well, I wouldn't count him out. And Mr. Pellier, who's the leader of the Conservative Party, is surging in the polls now, but now is not election time. The election's 2 years off, and things can change very quickly. So I think there probably will be a change, but you never know, Gerry. It can go from triumph to tragedy very quickly for political leaders that count their chickens before they're hatched, and assume that they can just coast. Canadian citizens are pretty shrewd in their instincts and their judgments. May not follow politics too closely, but when they do get in to vote, they don't like people that are taking them for granted, and aren't dealing with the needs of most Canadians. And most Canadians are, I'd say 80% are really hardworking, expect people to pay their taxes, expect people to obey our laws, and live peacefully together in a very multicultural, diverse culture that we do have in Canada, which I think is a big strength. So Canadians work hard, um, and expect other people to work hard too. So they're, I'd say, small C conservative in those areas, but have compassionate hearts for people in need, people with disabilities, people down on their luck, and are willing to be liberal and generous about offering a hand up, and are willing to do that if people are willing to work on their own behalf as well, and not take advantage of that generosity of Canadians.
You know, we were talking about a couple of days ago. We were talking about the politicians don't seem to stick around that long, and of course, I had to ask you. And Mike knew the answer to this, but most Canadians wouldn't. Is who's the longest serving premier right now in Canada amongst the provinces and the territories? And it's actually Scott Moe from Saskatchewan. And I think he's got, what did I say he had? I think he had 5 years. He has 5 years, 265 days. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt that we'll give him a 6-year pin. But it's surprising that these guys, politicians, get so beaten up by the public, they don't stick around. Even your career, you said after a term of being premier of British Columbia, it's hard on families.
Well, it is, and politicians used to be elected for a long time. People like W.H.C. Bennett here in BC was elected for over 20 years as premier. Peter Lougheed next door as a conservative premier was equally that long. Tommy Douglas in Saskatchewan with the NDP was elected for years from the early 1940s to 1962. And so you've got the old history of politicians. If they were good at what they did, they kept getting mandates from the public to go on a long time. Nowadays, your shelf life is, as you just described so accurately, is your shelf life is a lot shorter for a whole bunch of reasons. It's hard to keep people pleased, and what have you done for me lately attitude. Yeah, you did that. Okay, now what's next? And social media has had a profound impact. The internet and all the various Twitters and ways that people can Facebook, ways that people can communicate instantly and say whatever the heck they want. And a lot of it's pretty horrific what this is saying about politicians and some of the minority communities, and that worries me, the corrosive effect that kind of anger and anonymous cowardly attacks is having on our democracy.
Well, my younger brother in the 70s, I remember for whatever reason, my mom was a real political hound, and my dad, and I'll tell a great story as we get into the history of British Columbia and the premiers. But my younger brother drew all these politicians like Robert Stanfield, Diefenbaker, all these Pierre Trudeau, all these politicians. My brother drew them all into cartoon characters. But so back then, politics was big. I'm born in 1961. So from the time I was 12 years old, our mom and dad would really, they had interest towards politics. So it was interesting. So let's get into the history of premiers in British Columbia. And this is what I remember. This is the story that I wanted to tell. W.C. Bennett had been the premier since August 1st, 1952 to September 15th, 1973. Now, I remember we lived in Canberra River, and Dave Barrett won the election. And my mom and dad honestly believed that the sun would not rise on the 16th of September because the NDP had won their first election in British Columbia. As you said, W.C. Bennett had been I guess they called him Wacky Bennett. Now you're going to have to fill in why did they call him Wacky Bennett? But it was very interesting that it was such a big deal back then for my mom and dad in September 15th, 1972. But tell me a little bit more about Wacky Bennett.
Well, he was a brilliant politician. He was a real populist. He tapped into the fact that the province was more than the province was more than the Vancouver Club and the downtown Vancouver business community. That it was a huge place, and the hinterlands in the interior and the Okanagan and the Kootenays and in the north, and on Vancouver Island, the northern part of Vancouver Island, were equally important. And he made sure that the services that the province provided in terms of building schools and new universities and healthcare and highway politics was big with him. Were there for people that had been left out in the other parts of the province, not just downtown Vancouver. And he did some very bold, none-free enterprise things too. He was prepared to take risks. For example, to nationalize the BC Electric Company and turn it into BC Hydro, a Crown Corporation. And then, in a very hotly contested decision, decided to build huge dams on the Columbia and the Peace River, rather than just one dam, one set of dams on the Columbia, with a treaty between Canada and the United States and British Columbia and Washington. He also did the Peace and built, up a huge reservoir in the north, and a W.C. Bennett Dam, and then was able to have it all paid for by the American payment of over $200 million, and produce some of the least expensive continual hydroelectric power in the world. And people realize that was a profoundly important, far-sighted decision, was to build this renewable power that we could sell down to the United States, and deal with flooding on the Columbia in the U.S., and make really good revenues for the people of British Columbia. And then the revenues could be used to build out the public education system, both K-12 and post-secondary, and do it throughout the province, and bring in the college systems that he had the president of UBC, John McDonald, do a study and recommend building Okanagan College and the college Caledonia in the north and other colleges like that, so that young people throughout BC could get a post-secondary education and build hospitals and healthcare and highways, and an infamous highways minister, Phil Ghilardi, who was very close to losing his license because people said he was flying too low on the highways.
And that's why they call him Flying Phil Ghilardi.
Flying Phil Ghilardi, yeah. Well, and the other big decision he made, W.A.C. Bennett, was to take over the Blackball ferries that the CPR owned and turn it into BC ferries. And as much as, there's complaints about BC ferries now, it's still, still 98% of the time it carries people around schedule, all up and down the coast. And it's one of the largest ferry fleets in the world, with carrying 22 million passengers and millions of cars every year. So W.A.C. Bennett had a classic develop the province's resources and open up the forests and the mining opportunities throughout BC, and build sawmills and pulp mills and give people long-term tenures so that they could find the financing to build these forest facilities, or the hundreds of millions of dollars it costs to put in a mine, or develop the gas fields up in the Peace, one of the largest reservoirs of natural gas in the world. So he was a classic modernize the province premier that kicked it all off, and he was rewarded with over 20 years as premier.
Now, I'm not going to go into all these names, but I will ask, how did Dave Barrett, how was he able to defeat Wacky Bennett?
Well, it was a combination of W.C. Bennett not knowing when to retire.
Okay.
He stayed one election too long. And Dave ran a very clever campaign, used a lot of humor, didn't talk victory, just talked about some of the things that the NDP would do for people in terms of bringing in a public auto insurance corporation, the Agricultural Land Reserve, the BC Ambulance Service. There was a number of quite appealing platform commitments that he made, and he didn't look or sound threatening. He wasn't threatening to expropriate people's homes and businesses, and all the fears that the free enterprisers like you and your parents were concerned about with the NDP, and ran a really good campaign. I was part of it. I was campaign manager for two of the NDP MLAs that got elected, Emery Barnes and Gary Locke in Vancouver Centre. And when we election night, we didn't have a clue what was going to happen. We just focused on our riding and found out that we'd won. And then we found out that the NDP had won a huge victory of a big majority of seats and got to form government. Now, unfortunately, they couldn't get elected again in 1975 and lost to W.C. Bennett's son, Bill Bennett, who then was premier for 10 years until 1975 to 1986.
So we're going to fast forward it. From 1975 to 1991, we had a Socrat government in British Columbia. And then we had this young, scrappy kid from Vancouver. And let me just look at his name, Michael Harcourt. How did Michael Harcourt defeat the Socrats, who had another 16-year run with three? They had Bennett, they had Van der Zam, they had Rita Johnson, and Mike Harcourt came along and started to pave the way for the NDP party for the next 1, 2, 3, 4. There was about four premiers under the NDP stripes. So how was Mike Harcourt able to defeat this Socrat party?
Well, again, it was a combination of the weakness of Bill Van der Zam, although he was very strong-willed, strong-opinioned, a Dutch immigrant who ran a quite successful nursery business and a interesting fantasy gardens tourist attraction out in Richmond. But he managed to defeat himself to a certain extent because he was caught in a conflict of interest and dealing with fantasy gardens and a billionaire who gave from Taiwan, who handed him a brown bag handed Bill Van der Zam a brown bag with $20,000 in it and told him to keep it. And oh, by the way, he was just trying to get a license to set up a bank in British Columbia. And Bill had just arranged to sell fantasy gardens to this Tung Yu, the billionaire from Hong Kong or from Taiwan. And that became a subject of an investigation that charges were laid, and Bill had to resign in disgrace because of that. And I also took a very positive approach to the election and a positive approach to relationships with the business community, that we weren't just there for the union movement. We were very strongly associated with issues, unions and issues affecting working people. But I made it clear that we're here to partner, not compete, you're not the enemy. And we need to work together, where the government provides the atmosphere and the education system to have skilled workers and good health care for them, and social safety net for people in need. But it's up to the business community to create wealth. We'll help create wealth because that's what a good education and healthcare and social safety net and clear, fair rules and regulations can accomplish. And I said, we're at a speech I gave to the business community, which shocked some of the more socialist members of the NDP, when I said, we're here to help you create wealth and make a profit. Because we need to do that, then we have the revenues we need to provide the services to the people of British Columbia. And so we're going to work together. And there's I only have three simple requests of you. One, treat your workers fairly. Two, pay your fair share of taxes. And three, don't mess up the environment.
Hmm.
And you do those three things, and we'll get along just fine.
So you got to spend 5 years, just 4 years and change as a premier, and then you had enough. I know we were talking about this issue over in Nanaimo with Dave Stupich. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then that was it for you.
Yeah. No, I heard that, and there was accusations, very strong ones, that the Dave Stupich and the Nanaimo Commonwealth Society that he headed up was misusing funds that were supposed to go to charities, misusing them for political and personal use. And so I had a forensic auditor, John Parks, brought in to investigate not just the NDP, but the other political parties too, and the use and misuse of lotteries and bingo and other ways of raising money. And Parks found that Dave Stupich and the Nanaimo Commonwealth Society had actually misused $2 million that he'd purchased an $800,000 house on Gabriel Island and other real estate, and had made some of the funding available for political purposes that were not supposed. The money wasn't supposed to be used for that. And this was a bombshell. It just totally shocked me that I had no idea that had taken place, because it took place before it just started before I even became involved as an MLA and involved in provincial politics and became head of the NDP, because I hadn't been involved very actively in the sense of being on the New Democrat board of directors or provincial council or executive table officers. And I wasn't in the inner sanctum. And it happened, these events happened in the 70s and 80s. And I actually uncovered them by hiring the forensic auditor. And it was a real bombshell. It was a shock to me. And I was ready to retire. And then anyways, I'd been involved for 24 years. And I figured, hey, I've done my bit. I've won 9 elections in a row, some of them by wide margins. And this was terrible what had happened, even though I had nothing to do with it. I decided it was time to retire and put in my resignation as premier.
Okay, so now we're into the NDP party in British Columbia. We've got John Horgan, who seems to have a great reputation. I'll get your opinion on the job that he did. And now we have David Eby, which will be going into the next election. He took over November 18th, 2022. So a couple thoughts about John and David, and then we're going to jump into our love of Maui. So tell me a little bit more about John Horgan and your views. And
I think John was a very good premier, and people liked him. He was the kind of guy you want to go have a beer with. A very sports loving, friendly Irish background, and loved playing rugby and basketball and sports. And he had a good touch with people, and had some very good policies that he introduced. I first met him when I was premier, and he was one of my key staff. As a matter of fact, his first big assignment was I sent him up into the Kootenays to set up the Columbia Basin Trust and Columbia Power Corp, where we took over Kootenay Power by voluntarily acquiring their assets and turning it into a source of economic development opportunities for people in the Kootenays, and as a way of creating revenue to do that, and to use a lot of the income to clean up the environmental mess that had been created by the reservoirs and the damming of the river, the Columbia River, and had a devastating effect on the people in the Kootenays. So I sent him up there to set that all up, did a bang-up job with the MLA for the area, then Corky Evans from Nelson area. And then I hauled him off of that, and I said, John, I got a little task for you on Vancouver Island. It's called Clayoquot Sound, which was where the intensest part of the war in the woods that had taken place, accelerating in the 80s and into the 90s between environmentalists and loggers and forest-based communities and First Nations people. And I had John go in and come up with getting a way to get people to sit down and talk around a table and come up with solutions. And he was able to succeed in doing that and putting a plan in place for Clayoquot Sound, where it was turned into a UNESCO heritage site, and no clear-cut logging allowed, selective logging by the Aboriginal people in the area, the Nuchelna. And then thirdly, I had a big decision to make as premier on Elcan, the big aluminum producing company up in Kitimat, wanted to do the next phase of creating dams, build power, which they weren't going to use to create aluminum. They're going to sell it into the States to make a profit on, but it was going to kill off the Nechako River. It's going to reduce the flow of the Nechako River almost 90%, which would have ruined a huge part of the Chinook salmon fishery in the Fraser River. And I decided to stop that. And the announcement was controversial. A lot of people liked it and thought it was a good idea for the reasons I just outlined, environmental and fisheries, and the negative impact it would have on First Nations communities along the Fraser in particular. But Elcan and its president, Bill Ritz, were outraged, of course, that they couldn't proceed with the permission they'd been given in the 1950s. And so demanded a meeting with me, and Bill Ritz, the president, American president, was seated across the table from me and pointed his finger at me. He said, Harcourt, we're going to sue you for $1 billion personally. And I started to laugh. He said, what are you laughing about? I said, Bill, you're threatening a trial lawyer with a lawsuit? That's like threatening to give a surgeon a scalpel. I mean, go ahead. You're going to lose. But I got a better idea. Why don't you get these two hotshot vice presidents you have with you, and they'll sit down with my deputy, Doug MacArthur, and John Horgan, one of my senior staffers, and work out a new deal, which John and Doug did with these guys, and we signed a new deal, new 30-year, $500 million water license for Elcan to do an expansion and a modernization that made them state of the art in the world. So John, I've known for a long time. I guess my long-winded explanation is he was a very experienced guy before he even ran as an MLA. He'd already served in the public sector. He'd served in Ottawa as Ed Broadbent, who was the leader of the federal NDP's office. Before that, he'd gotten a degree in public administration, public policy at Trent University in Ontario after growing up in the Souk area. And then with his wife, who we met, Lily from met her in Trent. He went to the University of Sydney in Australia for a master's in public administration and public policy. So he's a very well-grounded guy in governance, in policy, politics. So when he became premier, he wasn't a rookie. He knew what he was doing, and very clear in the commitments he made of what he wanted to get done. To the big one, still the most important issue of the province is establishing a new relationship with the 200,000 Aboriginal people in BC, and dealing with the land use challenges, and of course forest fires and climate change, and the terrible opioid and drug problem we have, homelessness and lack of affordable housing. There's a lot of really tough, big issues, and people's pocketbook issues, struggling to get by from day to day. And I think Gerry, he did a very good job, and Dave Eby is carrying on in that manner and doing it his own way, and is doing a good job. I think Dave hopefully would be rewarded by getting reelected in next October when the provincial election happens.
Well, I believe this podcast alone is going to get the NDP reelected. So, and minus my vote, like I say, Socred. Well, there is no Socred; it's Liberal. But I'll tell you, I've learned so much about the Liberal, the NDP, of all the discussions we had, and I've always said that if I would have met Mike Harcourt a lot younger, I would have been a lot more open-minded when it came to my narrow-minded, my closed-end views. Okay, so before we let you go, let's talk about Maui for a couple minutes, and you've been going back and forth to Maui, and that's where you and we met at a board meeting with one of the companies that we were involved with. But tell me a little bit about your love of Maui, and I know we get to see you guys in the next couple of weeks in Maui. So
I'm looking forward to seeing you and Melissa there, and sharing some of the good sun and warm air and the great atmosphere of the Hawaiian heritage and the tropical, lovely nature of Maui. So we're really looking forward to that, Gerry. And it's tough to beat. As a matter of fact, Maui for a number of years has been declared the number one island visitor choice in the world. And there's good reason for it. And that's why the four of us, team up and have fun, good meals, and talk to see each other and have this kind of a conversation where you're trying to convert me into being a soak bread, and me to convert you into being a New Democrat.
I'll tell you, I know we joke around, but there is some pretty hard selling going on every time we're lifting a glass. There is some hard selling going on. So, Michael, I really appreciate your time. I've always told you we appreciate and love Becky and yourself as friends, and I really thank you for doing this. And let's hope that the NDP can take this podcast and run it through the media, and hopefully we can have make Harcourt very proud of the Mike. The current two premiers. So,
Well, thank you, Gerry, and I hope the podcast helps you with your very innovative and exciting Snowbirds device and the work you're doing to expand the very successful wealth management investment advisory business you got. You are a genuine entrepreneur success.
Well, Mike, my mom and dad would be very proud, and like I say, you kill it. We know you kill it well. And when you did bring up, with those in Clayoquot Sound, I remember those days and tree huggers and people spiking trees, and there's always a peaceful solution to these problems. So thanks again. Big hugs to Becky, and we'll let you enjoy your afternoon.
And we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Okay, Gerry. Bye-bye.